let's dive in a little bit further and talk about how to apply these techniques to increase e-commerce conversion. So the reason why it's extremely important to do this, and this is an older picture that you could use from any major city, like you would find in Singapore or in the States or anywhere else, is really looking at how much noise and congestion that goes on day to day. And it's even more so really now in our digital world. And what we are focused on because of our short attention spans, which I don't equate necessarily to a goldfish. My nickname's Shark, so I'll say it's the attention span of a shark. But we're trying to grab people's attention, and it's become even more cluttered today because of so many different unique channels that are out there all the time. So, how do we really grab somebody's attention and then convert them to a sale? That's what we're going to talk about. First thing I do though with every kind of campaign that I start on is make certain that you look at your targeting. Make certain that you know who your customers are, who you're targeting, those types of consumers, so that you can apply these techniques towards and have a higher conversion rate because you're hitting the right kind of people. It is key to any performance that you're doing. And having worked in big data and looking a lot at the back end data upon campaigns, working with a lot of major brands all over the country, this has been important wherever I've gone. So the first thing that I always encourage people to take focus of with any campaign is to leverage the power of brand. There is an amazing amount of opportunity that people have to drive better conversions simply by playing up on brand positioning and building in that trust. That also applies different techniques that we'll talk about in a little bit. But when you think about Bayer aspirin, which is a popular aspirin here, it's popular all over the world. People pay more for a brand called Bayer that basically gives you the exact same thing that a generic equivalent of aspirin gives you. So why is it that with all the things that go on, when we know that this has the same thing in a cheaper bottle, why do we pay more? Well, there's a lot of tactics that are used, a lot of obviously history that goes into the marketing part of the brand, but a lot of things that also drive that conversion. So one of the things that I love to talk about often is there are a lot of different perceptions that we create with our brand and leveraging things. And each one of these, by the way, are different examples that may not pertain exactly to your business, but hopefully this will create some ideas for you to open up your mind to. But when you look at creating a perception of a brand and where to leverage that online, leveraging the fact, for example, that Italian and French named or based wines that come from certain regions automatically have a built-in level of credibility, if you will, that tends to drive their prices higher. So when you look at adding words like French and Italian to something as simple as wine versus Napa Valley here in the States, it does provide a lift because it is a perception that people understand, at least as a perceived value in what means more. Now, to give you another example that's famous worldwide is Tiffany. Tiffany was the company that took the same kind of diamonds that were, sourced overseas, likely in places like Africa. And those diamonds were not really that much different than 99% of the other jewelers. They did have a high quality. They only sold the best. But basically what they did is they figured out a way to really embrace the packaging of a diamond that you could buy somewhere else. Now, oddly enough, you can buy the diamonds at Tiffany. What you can't buy is this little blue box with a ribbon that they're so well known for. So building up that power of packaging as well has really helped them perceive a different value that we didn't think they necessarily would need to achieve, but it has obviously given them a huge amount of lift. But these are the kind of decisions that we're going to discuss in a little bit, because we know that 95%, or at least that's what scientists are telling us today, are making purchases with decision making that takes place in the subconscious mind. That was based on the studies written by Gerald Zaltman of the Harvard Business School on the book How Customers Think. And people basically take shortcuts to make those decisions. So why do we use behavioral science? It's not necessarily a trick or a tactic or something you can always apply with your own, little blue box or Italian wine, but it basically gives you a much better understanding of the principles of human behavior that at least gives marketers the capability to nudge a customer through a decision-making process, which we often look at as a purchase. And so a lot of these cognitive biases or errors in the way people perceive our environments, and they make the kind of judgments that they need to make that affect nearly all of us. But marketers are able to really capitalize on these today. So let's go into a couple of them. One is focusing on opportunity. And part of this is because of a loss aversion. It's really the idea when you walk past the slot machine, knowing that you have the opportunity to win, but if you don't take advantage of that opportunity, you could lose. It creates a fallacy of a potential loss, which is why so often you see jackpots that sit just off 777s. But it's one of the oldest tricks of marketing. Using a loss aversion bias is responsible for the technique being so popular. And if a brand manages to create the image in the eyes of those consumers that it's not necessarily, buying a particular product, they're likely to lose out on something. It can successfully manage to get people to jump towards taking the opportunity to try to win something, if you will. The next we're going to talk about is zero risk. So zero risk for us is one of the hardest things that we're all trying to get customers to take advantage of something, trying to move forward with something. One of the biggest problems, though, is getting somebody from $1 to $100 is not hard. Getting them from 1 penny or the smallest amount for whatever the currency is to anything, from zero to anything, that's the big thing that we have to figure out a way to get people engaged more quickly with. So when you look at zero risk bias, that is where a consumer is more likely to purchase a product if they feel it's very low on the risk. So when you're doing something that you're marketing, whether it's a product or service, consider emphasizing whether or not you're able to provide that at a lower risk to people, because people understand that somewhat of it is an illusion of durability, if you will, regarding a product or service, but consumers are more likely to buy it based on a zero risk bias. So this next one is urgency, and this is a favorite one of mine because I canceled a service that I was using about 9 months ago, and I've still on the email thread or still on the email campaigns of this brand. And not to call them out, but I've gotten 2 to 4 emails a day with offers, and almost every one of them that makes me pause, even as a consumer, to consider them is the creating urgency, understanding that an offer will expire is one of the most important things we can do as marketers to try to incentivize people to take advantage of something. Knowing when something ends and emphasizing that helps drive higher conversions. It's something I've used many, many times on tactics. And again, a lot of these are sales that companies create for any kind of product or service, but being able to leverage that in a campaign is really critical to drive traffic. What's funny about this group, though, is I have gotten about probably 200 to 300 of, redeem the offer today because it's about to expire. There's other verbiage that was in this email thread that showed when it was about to expire. I haven't gone back to working with them, but what's funny is this is a tried and true campaign tactic of theirs. They're a globally recognized big company that does this over and over and over and over, and it does work to a fair amount. Another one of the biases that we can create is really understanding how to create exclusivity, understanding how you can tell a customer, for example, that they are part of a limited group can drive higher conversions. Not only when you think of just the last one, we talk about urgency, talk about a limited time offer, really letting people know that this is for a select group of customers. And this really dives deeper into personalization, which is why earlier I touched on knowing your first party data and scrubbing it well, but really creating that environment where somebody feels that this offer is exclusive to, helps them become part of an exclusive club, is something that for a lot of campaigns will help you drive much higher conversion. One of my absolute favorites, and one of these is an example that we've seen all over the world, especially here in the States, is the scarcity campaigns. So looking at scarcity and the bias that is injected with understanding that. So this one was, for example, something you would have found on shelves if you were trying to buy toilet paper, bleach, hand sanitizer, or all the things that people were trying to collect and keep in their household during the pandemic. But creating amount of scarcity, whatever type of campaign you're in, will generally drive higher conversion if you know that if consumers know that there is a limited amount of this offer, not only due to time or to necessarily be part of an exclusive club, but there's only a limited supply of something. So taking advantage of that opportunity can provide you a significant lift. Another one, again, I talked on exclusive, but this is a little bit of a twist that again goes back to your first party data. Creating tailor-made conversations, showing somebody, this is taking personalization, if you will, up a notch. That special feeling that somebody would get just by this metaphor of somebody having a suit that is tailor-made to fit them. It is taking offers that are specifically to an individual customer. Those can process through a lot of different algorithms that are fairly easy to create, but giving someone a different offer than somebody else would have gotten. Maybe they got $125 off versus the other slide I showed you just a minute ago, and someone else only gets $50 off, making that example up. But that's one of those ones where somebody feels like it's tailor-made specifically for them because of their residence, because of where they physically locate, because of the opportunity that they looked at today. There are different ways to leverage an algorithm to create a tailor-made offer to someone to drive a higher lift. One of the most important things that I talk about this all the time on my show. I talk about this all the time because I've been fiddling around with Rubik's Cubes since I was little kids, is, we as marketers, especially today, because of the pandemic, have to look at being problem solvers for our customers. Being able to take a person's problem and help them show why it's making them money, saving them money, fixing a problem. And again, that goes back towards tailor making these solutions. There are different ways to help them solve their specific problem, which is the business we're in. It can also, when you're able to uncover that through different, levers and techniques that we use, you're able to drive a higher conversion when you show them how they can fix their particular problem. Another is really when you're doing anything on e-commerce, if you have the opportunity to inject this in, show a progress bar. People want to know where they're able to move, how they're moving forward, what are the number of steps. And you see this often with a lot of surveys. I'll give you a good example where they show it is a 2-minute survey, and they will show you a bar showing you how many steps you have to go or to complete, or a progress bar with something with color. This drives higher completion of those. And it's something that also helps drive people further down the funnel. Driving them down that funnel, getting them closer to purchase, is something that people really need to do over and over. So whenever you have an e-commerce brand, remind them what is in their cart. It helps them more likely. I'm very guilty of this myself. I'm not using me as a consumer necessarily as a great example, but I often put things in my cart where I shop for something online. I don't purchase it that minute, but when I go back and look and I know I have something I need to buy, I either buy that then or I go add more products and then purchase it. When you keep things in your cart, it's very rare that I've seen in a lot of campaigns where people go back and completely empty carts. It happens, of course, it happens a lot, but I've seen quite a few instances where when you keep things in a cart or show people that they have things in their cart, it gives them an amazing ability to further convert better because people want to see that progress. And again, this is part of the scientific symbol for dopamine. That reward that people get from completing it is literally something as part of behavioral science that we study that shows where where they get a reward, if you will, once they've completed something. So driving that and continuing it to do it over and over to remind them of where they are in the purchase can really go a far way. Now, this also goes back to what is called the Zeigarnik effect. And the Zeigarnik effect was named after a Soviet psychologist, Bluma Zeigarnik. And in psychology, the Zeigarnik effect occurs when activity that has been interrupted may be more readily recalled. It postulates that people remember unfinished or uninterrupted tasks better than completed tasks. So where are you able to really leverage that in e-commerce is being able to show them again where they are in their carts and continue to help them drive them further and further. That also can apply to your landing pages or wherever your e-commerce site is. If it's a form fill or if they're completing a purchase online with a credit card or something like this, not enough traffic. We drive so much traffic to pages and spend so little time optimizing those pages in order to help people really convert over and over and over. And one little tactic you'll find used, and it'll depend on your landing page, of course, is to show the call to action, as I refer to CTA, show that call to action in multiple places as a button, as a link somewhere on the page, that it interrupts them and shows them often where to find where it's easy for them to convert. A lot of pages with a lot of clients I've worked with over the years, people will list a button maybe at the top, maybe at the bottom, but very rarely more than once and very rarely more than twice. I've seen top performing pages do this and do this well with subtle and sometimes one or two big ones that call out trying to drive somebody to convert. This also helps when you think about landing pages, and I'll go back to this in a second. The von Restorff effect, which is also known as the isolation effect, predicts that when multiple homogeneous stimuli are presented, the stimulus that differs from the rest is more likely to be remembered. Now, why is this important? When you go back, and this is not the best page in the world to look at from a graphic standpoint, I didn't spend all day on Photoshop on this one, but you'll notice that this color scheme is white, blue, bluish, aqua blue, and orange with some black text words. The buttons in this case are red. Very rarely are you going to be able to do that without your agency or your in-house branding person saying that doesn't fit our color scheme. Well, what fits your color scheme should be tested, because if you had these colors, for example, or let's say they were green, purple, and whatever, putting a color that doesn't look like what the rest of the page looks like, that doesn't blend in to the rest of your brand, is something that will call out that type of effect and help stand out and will drive better conversions because of it. And again, look at different types of what I call pills, whether it's a pill for where it says CTA, a more rectangular pill where it says learn more, or a box or a rectangle that says subscribe. Look at taking things that didn't necessarily look like the rest of the page and have them make a bigger statement, if you will, that stand out from the rest of the page. That is what you want your consumers to notice. They're not sitting back there and thinking, oh my gosh, this color is off slightly. I didn't like the blue, on the orange and it didn't stand out. Well, that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them to act upon something. So looking at these different call to actions in a different way with whatever color scheme you feel comfortable with, do something that is different. Now I throw this in sort of as a little bit of a joke because of this singer in the middle that some people know because she got famous for Ariana Grande for a lot of reasons. Great singer, but she also licked some donuts. But look at your thank you pages. An amazing opportunity that so many people fail. So many people fail to optimize are their thank you pages. And that could be in any form or fashion upon once they've either clicked on or completed a subscription or a purchase. You can do so much further with brand messaging, upsells. There's so many different opportunities if you give somebody something other than thank you for your purchase. That is where a lot of people just stop. I can tell you from personal experience that a lot of different campaigns where we added something extra as either an additional call to action or an additional, well, we did it with one charity. I remember doing it with one globally recognized charity with St. Jude Hospital, where on the thank you pages, we put the hospital to try to get people to donate more money to them. Had nothing to do with a product or service that we were particularly selling other than we were a sponsor of St. Jude Hospital. That had a wonderful, great message and gave some great kids and parents the opportunity to get cancer research done and drive some better brand awareness for us. So that was something that was really important, but very few people optimize thank you pages today. Another one is memory. You have to remember that when you are driving any kind of campaign to somebody, and I mentioned this earlier with some of the uncompleted tasks, one of the things that's incredibly important is you've got to realize with pages, it can be it can be a lot of fun to create some amazingly creative and amazing pages, landing pages and e-commerce pages and forums that have all kinds of buttons and graphics and so many choices, and they're just beautiful. But do they convert? And part of the reason is that the less cluttered pages often convert better. Part of that is because you're driving to drive a message that people remember. So you really have to focus on being able to give them a focus that drives that traffic where you want them to be. Maybe it's in the middle of the river there in Italy, but the water, but focus their attention on where you need them to convert and drive that more simply than more cluttered. Another tactic that I've used a lot, and not necessarily with this picture, but I've done this with a lot of different graphics. I heard the previous speaker mentioning something about imagery, and it reminded me to make sure that I call this out. Use eye clues in your imagery. Find images that often point towards where you want somebody to take an action. So, for example, this young lady is looking up to the top left where the word clues is, in that direction. It doesn't have to be exact, but if you have imagery, try to find imagery that is looking towards where you want them to act. It is a clue that I've used over and over and over, and I've tested over and over and over, and the many more times than not, and you're obviously going to have to test it out on your own page, is if you have a picture of a person, try to get a picture of a person where they're looking towards where you want them to take an action. It can make a big difference. Even in mobile, if you've got an image that stacks one on top of the other, sometimes I've used images where someone was looking down. And so it can be tough, but if you're not able to sit it side by side, you've got to either drop the image below the form, for example, and have them look up. When you do that, it looks better than somebody looking down. But if they scroll down on a mobile device, for example, you want them to be able to think to go back and look at that form or whatever the page is where you're trying to convert. Another one to think is use unexpected imagery. It is so often that we find the prettiest pictures that we can on Shutterstock or iStock Photo or Getty Images or any of these brands all over the world that have wonderful pictures that look great, like it was some sort of model shoot done with people that obviously have nothing to do with a product or service. Try to find something that doesn't look like it. There's so many great examples to where if you're selling, for example, hardware, maybe a hammer and nails and screwdrivers, take a picture with, you know, a zoo animal sitting next to a hammer. I'm bringing up ridiculous examples, but the more ridiculous it is, the more that it gets people to look. So it depends on your product or service, but take imagery that you wouldn't expect to always find with that normal product or service type picture, because a lot of that blends in. Again, you're trying to trigger something behaviorally in them to notice your page or your form, and a lot of that is not just using the same stock imagery over and over and over again. Now, one of the most important things I can tell you to do for, and this is so important for UX design today, is to really remove friction. There's so many friction points on landing pages today to complete sales. Make it as seamless as possible. Make it that pearl that comes out at the end. Remove that friction and give them the opportunity to convert more easily without 20 different friction points. And if you go back and look through your own site, you'll find opportunities like this to remove some friction point for a customer. Now, direction. Really providing people direction at a top level is something that not nearly enough marketers do, but we can pull a lot of these tricks with the types of our content. Obviously, and as well as the points. But one of the things I also want to talk about is when you're looking at your choice architecture, you really want to give them direction that points towards the place where you need them to convert. Yes, we want them to explore, to read as many of the great blog content pieces you have out there. That's wonderful. But ultimately, you're trying to drive them in as many ways as possible to not necessarily heavily direct response to it, but really anchoring them to find that piece of information, align it with your channel. So really look at those opportunities as well. Again, remind people, and especially in this day and age that we're in today, remind people that a purchase, and this is a lot done through trust, not necessarily, I'm not talking about making it a secure SSL type connection on your browser, but making certain that people feel safe and secure in their purchase with you. This is such a component where safety words, secure words are really triggering great responses, both in ads, and you'd be amazed at the type of things that you can do. I know this is something that Aaron and I have even been working together on planning for next year. It's helping people understand how safe and secure the DigiMarcon environment will be in 2021. These are the kind of things that are what we're listening to today. And I can tell you from email traffic, from paid search traffic, I've seen this in so many different channels where this is really converting a lot more. So the bandwagon, let's talk a little bit about the bandwagon effect. So it's a cognitive bias, which is exploited by us all, especially consumer good companies, as well as politics. And this is a political year here in the States, but according to the bandwagon effect, a consumer is more likely to purchase a product that's being purchased by others. Obviously, we know this is true with so many different review sites. You see, 5 stars is worldwide something that we all look for. It's because it creates an illusion as well of helping people feel like their purchase is useful to them as well as to so many others. And a good way for marketers to really exploit this is by creating advertising content that's focused on high sales already achieved by a product. That's one way, is so that you can get that quick and popular reward as well, and show where one product's 5-star review sits close to the overarching brand. Now, that's not a trick to be one product much better than the other. What I mean by that is just show that your brand has established that kind of reputation. And as well, one other trick that happens in a lot of countries I've given some advice on. There are generally multiple review sites. One of the things I would always encourage you to do is take a collection of reviews that come from those different sites. Don't just take one review site and show, reviews brought to you by XYZ brand, and then show Bobby, Susie, Johnny, all the different people, and they all look similar underneath. Try to aggregate some of the different reviews from multiple sites and display that to consumers. That shows that you have a broader and more trusted appeal than just one channel. And it's so important today because really, this is whatever language we're talking in whatever country in the world. This, to me, this 5-letter word is the most important thing that all of these tactics are helping you take advantage of, is the trust that you hopefully have built with your customer. Now, another one that I find very important today, if you think about your higher end restaurants, and this is an example similar to what we talked about with the perception of Italian and French wines, but this is a restaurant that was in Paris that had a menu. And one of the things you'll notice in high-end restaurants is the menus generally have a very much more ornate font than a lot of other restaurants. A lot of restaurants will typically have a boring font, something that looks very crisp and clean. But the more elegant styles you write can create a more perceived appreciation or consideration of elegance. Now, where does a lot of that cognitive fluency fit into this? A lot of it is through UX design, understanding where to perceive these within your landing pages or your e-commerce pages, and really understanding how to use some of the variations of fonts on the pages in the right place. Now, this doesn't mean to take a cursive font that you would use to talk about escargot and then throw it on basically your product or service. But it does show you that you can take a font and make something more elegant, if you will, and that can also create a more perceived higher value once you use it on whatever product or service page it is you're trying to sell. Another one of the tactics that I use across, and this is because I personally am a very big fan of holistic marketing. I posted a podcast on it today with the world famous Leland Bullock. We talked a lot about really being able to look at all of your different channels together as opposed to just the bright, shiny objects that we see so often today. But take one of the things that helps with the memory effect, again, is mimicking your creative across channels. So if you have a series of images that come from the same person, for example, this is from a famous cereal brand from the 70s. And if I'm looking at this via email, on a mobile campaign, if it's something through the web or in some way through the call center, not necessarily as an ad, but reflected in the conversation I have with them, this generally will trigger a higher conversion rate because people want to remember this, they are triggered by what they are more comfortable with and feel like they have experience with and more comfortable with and take further action. IBM Watson, I worked on one of their campaigns. IBM did this extremely well where their image from a YouTube commercial, for example, again, some of this was cookie based, but some of it wasn't, was triggered throughout the entire journey. I would see this on anything that I was interacting with them on different devices, and it was because it was triggered on that one campaign. Again, this is all done to help us get to yes, which is the most important thing, is going from 0 to 1, not 0 to 100. We can get from 1 to 100 easily, but 0 to 1 is really important. Another way to focus your efforts to drive higher conversions is to not silo your efforts. So many people at so many brands and so many agencies silo so much of their efforts. I was just talking about this with a friend of mine about podcasts. Podcasts are huge all over the world, but so many companies strictly look at podcasting as one independent channel. You've got to look at using this kind of imagery, the kind of campaign content messaging across all of the different channels you have. This is extremely important because it will drive generally a higher conversion point when it's been integrated across multiple different touch points for your customer. Your customers are seeing a lot of noise today. They're seeing it from so many different channels. You want to be able to align that noise. And we know that contextual ads, and this is proven on 99% of the campaigns I've ever been on, contextual ads drive a higher percentage of lift and conversion based on where it was in the journey with people. So understanding these techniques will help you drive higher conversion when it matters contextually to the customer. Now, to look at a couple of tools, if you are not using heat mapping today, please reach out to me after, and I will be happy with no commission for me with anybody. I'll be happy to point you to a lot of different tools. There's so many great heat mapping tools today. Look this up on your search engine. If you're not using heat mapping today, this is extremely important from a behavioral standpoint to figure out where people resonate with what kind of messaging and imagery you have. And it starts looking, I'll give you an example. The back image of this one, there was a directional imagery with the, you can barely see, it's a remote control up here. And then the text to the right roughly reflected that. So again, that's where some imagery can trigger a side look. It helps somebody look over when somebody's pointing to something or looking in a direction, things like that. Really looking at that kind of technology can help you see where your customers and consumers are actually going. Now, this is extremely important because regardless of anything I tell you today, you can ignore all of it if you're testing and testing extremely well. Very few people do this. I can give you every kind of behavioral science tip, trick, and technique to use on every one of your landing pages and e-commerce pages. And there's a very good chance that without testing, I'm still going to be able to drive higher conversion for you. But what is always true, it is your unique relationship with your unique customers always will react differently to your unique imagery, fonts, and everything else. So make certain to test and test frequently to achieve that statistical significance, to be able to tell you, are the tactics and techniques that we're talking about today going to drive a higher conversion for you? Now, again, I talked about all the noise. This is just sort of a odd but simple graphic. If you think about why behavioral science is important, if you consider each one of these tiles, if you will, as part of a quilt, this quilt has many different pieces that make it a quilt. All the different touch points, this represents ads you see on social, email, landing pages, your web page on the front end, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, it's out there. These are touch points we see with TV, with radio, any streaming service, whatever you want. There's a graphic, there's a tile on here for it. But at the end of the day, why we're leveraging these tactics to help drive a higher conversion, it's because this is what your customers see. And creating that perceived value that I talked about at the front is extremely important, because at the end of the day, they're not peeling apart the different pieces to figure out if all your techniques on Facebook, for example, worked extremely well. Did all of them work on Twitter or TV or radio? Of course not. You're trying to drive them to a much higher conversion standpoint because they have a lot of choices today. Many, many choices. We're simply trying to look at some of the different types of cognitive pieces that will help drive them towards converting and trusting, taking the opportunity to take advantage of your brand. Now, I always like to do this when I leave any presentation. I like to give you some good reads. These are books that I've read. I've actually got a podcast coming up with the second one with Tim Ash. I'm sure you can get these on any kind of service wherever you are. and listen to the audiobooks. I think almost all of them have audiobooks, but these are great reads. Martin Lindstrom's one of my favorite marketers in the world. He wrote Biology, which is an international bestseller. But any of these books are fantastic ways to help you, again, understand how your consumers think. So I mentioned that I work for AI Media Group. I work on marketing and digital marketing strategies and tips and tricks and techniques with clients all over the globe. But I also, as a side fun project for something I've been doing for a good decade now, but this iteration I've been doing for a little over 2 years, is a podcast called A Shark's Perspective. And some of these marketers you may know, but these are some of the top influencers in the world, many of whom will be speaking at DigiMarcon next year as well. Some of these faces and names you may recognize, but wherever you're physically located, I think these are the kind of things that will, the types of discussion things I'm talking about is not a way to sell you, but it's about thinking about marketing in a more holistic point of view. The reason it is called A Shark's Perspective, I mentioned earlier that my nickname is Shark, and I am an avid swimmer with sharks. It's one of the things I've done in Singapore as well. I wish that I was physically there so I could be outside in the water, scuba diving again, swimming with whatever the shark is near to me. So on that, I would like to thank you very much. Feel free to find me on any of those channels. I wish each of you extremely well. Hope you are all safe and progressing well and surviving. I wish you would reach out to me with any questions you might have after this. A big, and I'm trying to scroll down and it keeps moving away. A big thank you. So let's move to see, do we have any questions? So one of the things that I saw on here I wanted to mention was, do I think that using real images is more impactful than stock imagery? Absolutely. 100% believe that having a more authentic picture that does not look like stock photography will drive a higher lift. Again, this is what is working specifically for you. You're going to have to test out, because if stock imagery kills it, then that is the tactic you need to pursue. I would encourage you again to test it and achieve that, but it's a much cheaper way. It's a much better way often to be able to tell your story to your customers as well, with using imagery that's of real customers and employees. And Aaron, that may be you moving things around. So the surprise effect, let me see this here. Great presentation. Thanks for the images. Again, you spoke about the importance of the surprise effect, but also that of memory recognition. So what makes sense it is to use good images repeatedly. So what makes sense? Does it make sense, I think is what you're asking. Does it make sense to use good images repeatedly? 100% correct. So this was, and I'll drive back to a slide. This is why, if you're using imagery, whether it's stock or your imagery that you've taken, of an employee, for example, use that over and over and over again across all channels, whether it's on a TV campaign, whether it is on a landing page, whether it's in an email campaign, whatever it is, use that over and over and over. An example of friction points. So one of the examples of friction points is requiring somebody to provide something that you think you have to capture first in order to get them to progress through a certain amount of steps. For you, that could be, I'm going to give you an example of one client that I know that requires an email. A lot of people don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to give you an email, and so a lot of people will back off. You can look at and it's funny, you can use a lot of these heat mapping tools, a lot of those tools that allow you to watch, record, screen sessions as well, to see where people bounce off. And a lot of times it's because of the friction point you've created with requiring something phone number, email, whatever it may be. Now, at some point, you're going to have to collect something to either get them to fill out a form or consider where they're purchasing something. But requiring something that is a requirement primarily to you, but not necessarily to what they need to, to complete, to start the process rather. You don't have to ask for everything on the front end. You can ask it as in chunks of the way in order to move forward. And a lot of brands I know require certain things at the very front end that are collected later, but they're a have to have at this second and you can't move forward. So don't create a don't go past go, if you will, to borrow a Monopoly reference, without allowing somebody to really be able to move significantly forward without you, providing a stumbling block that isn't necessarily required. And that's hard to answer if I'm not looking at every one of the pages that you or anybody else has, but those are the kind of friction points you need to consider. Are they really, really required in order to move this forward? And you'll find a lot of times through testing that you'll receive a higher conversion, if you will, rather than somebody that just collected some front end piece of data that you may or may not have needed. So that being said, again, I'm very honored that you gave me the time. It is almost 1 a.m. here, so I'm going to go grab some sleep. And then I wish all of you extremely well. And Aaron, I'm my friend. I will turn it back to you,